From southern Spain to northern Britain, Europe is sweltering in an extreme heat wave. The temperatures and high winds are stoking massive wildfires across several countries, and scientists say these extraordinary events highlight the already very real consequences of global warming. Blazes have destroyed property and vast stretches of forest in France, Spain and Portugal, Italy and Greece. Hundreds of people have died in the record-breaking heat, and forecasters warn there's little prospect of any respite. The UK is not known for hot weather, but this week is proving exceptional. Huge crowds are heading to the beaches despite travel networks also feeling the heat.
In Britain, average temperatures in July are in the 20s Celsius. Anything approaching 30 counts as a heat wave. With the mercury now nearing 40, an extreme heat warning is in place, even for the north of England. Forecasters say on Tuesday the UK's all-time record of 38.7 could be surpassed.
To be honest, as a meteorologist, to see the brutality of the heat that we're expecting tomorrow is quite astounding. And it does worry me a lot, and my colleagues here in the Met Office, that this sort of unprecedented heat could be a regular occurrence by the end of the century.
Britons are not used to extreme heat, so officials are advising the public to take sensible precautions outdoors.
In particular, take measures to be hydrated, stay in the shade, do all the things that you would think are the sort of things you might do on a very hot day on holiday overseas.
Health experts are reminding people that extreme heat can be dangerous.
We have that balance where we might not see very much good weather and we want to enjoy it, but we're talking about temperatures that we've not experienced in this country ever, never mind for a long time. Our bodies, our houses, our culture, our way of life is just not geared up for it.
Train operators have lowered speed limits, fearing the heat could warp rails.
This is due to severe weather.
And that's disrupting services.
So, for instance, if you were going from London to Leeds today, after midday, rather than 2.5 hours, you're looking at a 5-hour journey.
It looks like I might not get back to Crewe today because of the heat, and I won't get back tomorrow. No trains tomorrow.
While some are preparing for the worst.
I'm choosing to stay at home because I don't want to get public transport, because it's great going to work, aircon's on, but then you've still got to get home.
Others are taking the heat in their stride.
There's nothing to get excited about, is it, really? If it ain't Brexit, it ain't the weather. You don't know what else to talk about, do we, really?
And meteorologist Scott Duncan joins me now from London. Scott, welcome to the show. Temperature records are being shattered all over Europe. Why is this happening?
So it's a particular severe heatwave that's been kind of brewing over Spain and Portugal and also Northwest Africa over the last few days, really. And it's been hot there for actually quite a while, even throughout May, and it's been drying out the ground. We've been intensifying the heat over Iberia, and then the perfect weather setup is there just to then start lifting that north through places like France and into the UK. So we're just starting to see just how hot this air mass is as it lifts north. So basically we've got an extreme weather event, but given the long-term warming of our planet, this sort of thing is just easier to break records now that our planet is indeed warmer.
Let's talk about the role climate change plays in all of this. How is this being exacerbated by a planet that is becoming warmer and warmer?
So, well, it maybe sounds more simple if you just think of the planet warming. Our hot sources, places like North Africa, even through Spain, Portugal and France, they're warmer. The sea surface temperatures are also very warm across the Mediterranean. And when we start to lift those air masses north across Europe, then they're more likely to be on the hotter side of what was considered normal in the past, for example. So it's just easier to then exceed these extreme thresholds. So as the planet warms, not just in Europe, but across the world, higher temperatures are just more likely to fall.
How worrying are these extreme weather events?
Well, we're seeing more and more of them, so that the combination of seeing these extreme heat thresholds not just being broken, but sometimes completely obliterated by quite large margins. We saw that in Canada last year. We've seen Japan with heat records this year. Now Western Europe's under the bullseye as we go through today and tomorrow. So obviously it's very concerning to see these temperatures not just here in Western Europe, but across the world. And it is kind of just bringing into light what's kind of possible. And once we get the extreme weather pattern just to show us what our new climate is like, then we do really start to see the impact on society.
Let's talk about the wildfires, which is, of course, also something that people all over Europe are very worried about at this point. Are we likely to see more of those? And could they also spread north as the heat has done?
Sure, actually, that was one of the most important things about this heat wave is it's been very hot and dry for a very long time. Even like early as May, we start to see very strong anomalous heat building out the Mediterranean. France has been super dry, Portugal, Spain as well. So that's actually helped intensify the heat in this heat wave and basically made it effortless for the heat to transfer its way north as well. So when the vegetation is dry, it can dry, well, it dries out and it can burn faster and harder when it does catch fire. Obviously, it's not the heat that's triggering the fire itself, but when you do get ignition, the fires can just ramp up and then blaze a lot faster and stronger than they did perhaps in a cooler climate where you've got a bit more precip still holding in the surface. So these extreme temperatures are kind of manifesting themselves and enhancing the fire risk. So even in places like the UK, as you mentioned, further north, we are seeing some wildfires. We had that actually early last week. We had some trackside fires with some fires as far as north as Yorkshire. And wildfires are not completely unheard of in our part of the world, but to get them on the scale of what we're seeing in the Mediterranean is obviously something that we're not accustomed to. And I'm sure without the speed restrictions on public transport and the precautions we're taking, we could have bigger issues. But yeah, further north, getting wildfires is not unheard of, but that is something that could be increasing with a warming planet.
All right, Scott Duncan, meteorologist in London, thank you so much for those insights. Now, Europe's heat wave has brought added urgency to international climate talks currently taking place here in Berlin. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres is urging rich countries to keep their promises to help poorer nations deal with global warming and its consequences.
They are here to build trust, the foreign ministers of Germany and Egypt. The two countries are co-hosting the two-day climate conference to prepare for the next big UN climate summit in November. Germany's Annalena Baerbock says countries need to redouble their efforts to hit climate targets.
The climate crisis does not stop at any border, and the climate crisis is now the biggest security threat to all people on this earth. So we will only be able to tackle it together. Because the climate crisis does not stop at any border, the response to it must not either. We must intensify our joint efforts.
Officials from 40 countries gathered for the summit to discuss staying focused on fighting the increasing impacts of climate change. Addressing the conference in a video message, United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres urged rich nations to keep their pledges to supply funds to countries hardest hit by the climate crisis.
Excellencies, this has to be the decade of decisive climate action. That means trust, multilateralism and collaboration. We have a choice, collective action or collective suicide. It is in our hands.
Hopes are high that the conference will lay the groundwork for a successful UN climate conference in Egypt this fall.
DW political correspondent Nina Haase is covering those talks. Welcome, Nina. The German Chancellor and the Egyptian President have given a news conference. What did they say?
Well, they covered lots of ground, obviously, but the Egyptian president is here also to attend those climate summit preparation talks. And of course, both countries talked a lot about the implications of Russia's war on Ukraine on their respective countries. Now, Egypt is feeling rising food prices extremely heavily. It used to import lots of its wheat from Ukraine. That's no longer there. And Germany sees Egypt as one of the partners with whom it can potentially diversify its energy supply. So Egypt today again stressed that it would be willing to deliver gas to Germany, and we're hearing that both countries are working on that very intensively and that might happen very soon.
And tell us about the German government's proposed global protective umbrella against climate risks.
Well, it's all those technical terms that sound like a lot of words, but really when you look at it, it comes down to the question of funding and how to get the structures in place so that farmers, for example, that lose their crops because of climate change, how can they get money quickly so that they can buy new seeds quickly so that they can then live of their own farming procedures. And those procedures, application for money, etc., at this point in time usually take years, and this is time that these people simply don't have. So Germany is hoping to essentially revamp the whole funding and financing procedure by November, which is when that big important climate conference is taking place in Egypt.
And that German hope seems to dovetail quite neatly with the Egyptian President al-Sisi's saying that African nations need more support to help this transition to green technologies and to mitigate climate change.
Well, yeah, many people are now questioning whether richer countries are actually being serious about their pledge that the era of fossil fuels is over because, you know, Germany is extending its coal power uses, it's also investing in LNG terminals, etc. So Germany's Chancellor Scholz today said that Germany and Egypt will work together closely to develop green hydrogen. And this is something where we don't know the timeline yet, but it would have huge, significant symbolic character, of course, because it would mean that both countries would send out this message that they're being serious, that all this investment in gas is just a temporary solution caused by Russia, essentially, and that really the transition into green technologies has started.
All right, thank you for that. DW Politics correspondent Nina Haase. Let's look at this with Sonia Siniferatni. She's one of Switzerland's leading climate scientists and a professor at the country's Federal Institute of Technology. She's been lead author on many international reports on global warming and joins us from Vienna. Welcome to DW, Professor. Will this heat in Europe that we're calling extreme today be normal in a few years?
Yes, definitely. Already now, heatwave have become more intense and more frequent, and this is going to continue to increase with increasing global warming.
Now, the Paris Climate Agreement saw world leaders pledge to limit global warming to well below 2 degrees Celsius. So where are we heading right now?
Well, at the moment, we are really not on track. So basically, if we continue on the same way that we are doing right now, we would reach about 2.4 degrees. So basically, we would be above the limit that was set within the Paris Agreement. If we want to limit global warming within the bound that was set in the Paris Agreement, and if possible to 1.5 degrees, we would need to have CO2 emissions until 2030, so very quickly.
OK. Given what is happening now, that's unlikely to happen, isn't it? We have the war in Ukraine prompting countries like Germany to reactivate old coal-fired power plants. How much of a setback is this renewed interest in fossil fuels?
Yes, this is certainly a problem. I think it depends basically how long this is happening for. So, for instance, if it's just basically this year because we are in a transition phase, while also, of course, we have less gas available, then it could be okay. But if we were to be using coal for several years, then it's going to have really serious consequences on the climate.
Talk to us about those consequences, because, as you say, we're nowhere near the Paris Climate Agreement goals, and we're increasing our dependence on fossil fuels because of the war in Ukraine. What is that going to look like?
Yes, so at the moment already, as I mentioned before, heatwaves are becoming more frequent, more intense. So if we look at the number of hot days that we have, so the number of years when we have hot days, events that would have happened once every 10 years are now 3 times more likely. And at 1.5 degrees, it would be 4 times more likely, so it would happen 4 times every 10 years. And at 2 degrees, it would happen 6 times every 10 years. So it means the majority of summers would be extremes.
It's hard to find any good news in this, because if we look at Paris again and said, well, if we hit those Paris climate targets today, we know that the consequences of what we've already done would still be with us. What would be the sort of the best case scenario in that scenario?
Well, the best case scenario is that we'll manage to limit global warming around 1.5 degrees, which would mean that we would still have conditions which are more extreme than now, but more or less similar to now, just a little bit more extreme. That would be the best scenario. But of course, this means also that no matter what happens, we need to adapt, we need to improve basically the preparedness for this type of events.
Understood. Let's hope the message is out there. Climate scientist, Professor Sonia Siniferatni, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Well, France is among the places bracing for extreme temperatures today. Our correspondent Lisa Lewis told us how people in the capital are dealing with the intense heat wave.
Well, here where I am in Paris, we have about 35 degrees, but we will reach between 38 and 40 later on this day. Actually, half of the country will reach 38 to 40 degrees today, and the government is warning that people should stay inside, that they should drink a lot, they shouldn't do any intense sports. And everybody's obviously thinking of 2003. When you look back, that was a very, very intense heat wave at the time, and at the time more than 19,000 people died here in France. The authorities want to prevent that, and that from happening again, obviously, and they have gotten ready. They have teams on standby that are checking on the elderly, especially those that live on their own. And mind you, for once actually France feels a bit like Great Britain. The main topic here is no longer food, it's the weather. And people are asking me, Lisa, what is your plan canicule? What is your master plan to withstand the heat? And my answer to that is water and this little thing, a handheld fan.
Talk to me, Lisa, about the wildfires that are burning in the southwest of France. They've forced thousands of people to evacuate. Are firefighters anywhere near getting those blazes under control?
Well, it is a very difficult situation for the more than 1,500 firefighters fighting these fires down in the south. 14,000 hectares have already burned to the ground, and the firefighters are reporting that it's very difficult to get the fires under control because the wind keeps changing. And although temperatures are likely to drop by about 10 degrees tomorrow, they are still struggling, and they're hoping for the weather to calm down in order to get this heat and the fire under control. People are obviously leaving. Some people are coming back from their holidays, which is, here's the holiday season as across Europe. And, they're cutting short to their holidays because it's obviously very dangerous down there. They have to move elsewhere at this time.
Lisa, thank you very much, and try to stay cool. Our correspondent Lisa Lewis there in Paris. So that's the situation in France. Things aren't much better in Spain, as I heard earlier from our correspondent Nicole Reese in Madrid.
Well, it's really all hands on deck, because wherever you look right now, in the west, in the south, in the north, in the east, there are fires, and you never know when the next one is happening. So it's a very quick situation, and it's very difficult to tackle these fires under these conditions. We just heard it there. That temperatures that are unusually high, like up to the mid-40s in some areas. And there's also wind, and it's very dry. So the firefighters really have all of their staff on the ground trying their best. Actually, we just received some news that 2 of the bigger fires in the west of Spain, in Extremadura, might be under control. That would be good news, because these fires had been there for almost 5 to 6 days now, and they have destroyed a surface of at least 10,000 hectares. Now, we're looking at a total damage this year of tens of thousands of hectares of natural reserve, and also obviously some parts of the villages are affected. So this is a whole big scale for this country. We have wildfires in summer, yes, but this surface at Copernicus, the EU program with the satellites, actually, they're saying it's more than 100,000 hectares. I think this is quite unusual also for Spain, and there are news all the time about the dangers of this job of the firefighters too. Just yesterday, they confirmed the death of one of them. He got trapped by the flames while trying to tackle them. Today, we received the news of a shepherd in one of the regions who unfortunately also has been killed by the flames. So we're not sure when this is going to end, because temperatures are going to slightly drop for a few days now, and maybe this helps. But they're going to go up by Wednesday again. And I think we are looking into a very long and terrifying summer.
terrifying summer. Well, Spain is used to hot summers, but this seems to be particularly intense at the moment, this heat wave. How are vulnerable people there dealing with it?
Well, these are the people, vulnerable people, but also other people who are most at risk because the heat affects the heart, it affects the brain, it affects the kidneys. So any normal function that you usually need is being jeopardized somehow. So people need to stay in the shade. They need to cool down. They need to see the medics as soon as possible if they have any issues, of course. This is how they try to cope with it here. Spain is used to higher temperatures, but as I said, it's a long heat wave. This is the unusual part. These heat waves get more extreme, they get longer. They're one phase of the climate crisis, and they make the perfect feeding ground also for these fires. So in terms of being safe, I, for myself, will shut everything down so no sun comes into my flat to more or less stay cool. That's what you can do, but I can feel it on my body. I have difficulties sometimes in breathing or just, being somehow agile because the heat is really drowning you. And last week alone, we look at least 360 people who've died in relation to this heat wave. Wow. And this is probably also it. It's going to northern regions now, and that's going to affect people much more because they're not used to these temperatures, and it's a humid climate there as well.
Nicole, thank you very much. That was our correspondent, Nicole Reese, there in Madrid. Let's get a scientific perspective on this heat wave. Alexander de May is an expert on atmospheric processes, and he's founder of MetClim, a company that provides climate change analysis, and joins us from Varese, Italy. Thanks for being with us. Dr. May, is extreme summer heat the new normal for much of Europe?
Well, indeed, as we have seen today and tomorrow, the northern countries in Europe are experiencing a heat wave with temperatures reaching in some places 40 degrees Celsius. The warm air comes from the south, more specifically from the African continent, and moves towards the north, reaching the UK, Germany, Benelux today and tomorrow. Many scientific studies and climate models predict that heat waves are more likely to happen in the next decades as a result of climate change. This is not something new. It is real and it is happening. Scientists from all over the world have been warning for many, many years that this would happen. Heat waves will be more frequent with higher temperatures and will likely last longer than 1 or 2 days. Right. I remember that 3 years ago, temperatures of 40 degrees Celsius were also measured in the Benelux. This was something rather new for the Netherlands. The heat waves are induced by human activities, such as driving cars, industries, and our way of consuming goods.
I wanted to talk to you about that, about our way of life and our CO2 emissions, because we know that CO2 emissions are the main driver of global warming. Given that these emissions are continuing to increase, what can we expect to see in the years to come?
Well, you hit the nail on its head. Coal, oil, and gas by power plants and industry are the main drivers for the increase of CO2 emissions. And recently, researchers say that they have seen a larger than expected rebound in CO2 emissions in 2021 after the COVID shutdown. So the CO2 emissions projections by the IPCC of the United Nations show an increase in CO2 emissions up to the year 2075 under low population growth scenario. So this will raise the Earth's surface temperature to almost 2 degrees Celsius. So CO2 emissions will continue to increase, and so will the temperature.
Now, to what extent would you say that the higher temperatures are contributing to the wildfires we see across Europe? Is there a definite correlation there?
Yeah, there is, because many of the wildfires are started by humans by throwing away their cigarette, outdoor barbecues, campfires, but also to some extent also traffic via engine parks. The fuel for wildfires is dead biomass, such as branches, grass, dead trees. When wind speeds are high and we have a lot of dead biomass material on the ground, it is quite easy for the fire to spread and to propagate beyond control, as we see this currently happening in France, Spain, Portugal, and Greece.
Thank you so much for those insights. That was Dr. Alexander de May, an expert on atmospheric processes.
My pleasure.